So I noticed last week, I think it must have been a week ago when I first noticed this. I originally had something like 65 subscribers, but at some point at the end of last week, my subscriber count went down to 63. I've lost a number of viewers for my channel, and I don't think it's any coincidence that the last 3 videos I made, they were politically natured. There was a video I made about Keir Starmer and how I argued in an ironic kind of way that he is actually one of the best prime ministers ever. And a video I also made about, what was it? The situation in New York and the Southport riots. I think that might have been the most contentious. In fact, part of me, I have suspicions. I might even know who it was who unsubscribed. But anyway, it's pretty simple. When I put 2 and 2 together, it seems most likely that some people were offended or upset by some of the views that I expressed in those videos. So I wanted to make this video addressing that. We live in a very turbulent and chaotic age. There's been a hollowing out of the political center. Decades ago, there were people on the left and the right. You know, in America, that there were Democrats and Republicans, and the UK, people might dispute this, but I believe this is true regardless. There were people, Labour and Tories, who used to hold a lot of things in common. But over the past few decades, that has been changing. There's been an emerging gulf in the theatre of politics. There's a schism between those who are broadly referred to as the left, but I think that's inaccurate. I prefer to call them globalists. And those on the right, who are otherwise known as nationalists or conservatives. But we can simplify this conflict, if we need to, by metonymically referring to each of them as the left and the right, respectively. I know that's an oversimplification, but for the sake of brevity, I think it's best that I refer to both of those using those 2 terms from this point onwards. So anyway, what does the left believe? Well, the left believes that there's no such thing as borders, that the idea of the nation state is obsolete. There are no fundamental differences in anyone around the world in terms of human biology or even ethnicity. They believe that all humans are essentially a blank canvas through which we transmit cultural norms and mimetic knowledge, and their minds are innately plastic to the extent where anyone can become an Englishman, anyone can become an American. It doesn't matter what your race or color or creed is. All we need to do is inculcate people with decent Western values, and anyone can become Western. Similarly, the left also believes that sex, biological sex, is also an invention. It's a mental state of being. Like, you can. Nobody is inherently male or female. It's just some people are born with male or female gametes. But if a person thinks that they're a woman, or if somebody born female thinks they're a male, vice versa, then that person must necessarily be male or female. That is what they believe. They believe a host of whole other things, which even a few decades ago would have probably been regarded as unthinkable. Now, the right, on the other hand, what does the right believe in? Well, more or less the opposite. The right believes that we are a species. Now, there's layers of beliefs and tenets depending on how far right on the spectrum you are, because there's, different people among the same coalition, what we might call the dissident right, might agree or disagree with these beliefs depending on, where they fall on the spectrum. But broadly speaking, the right is antithetical to the left. The right believes that the nation state is real. It's essentially a family of families. A nation is comprised of people who have a shared ancestral history and a common culture. In fact, the word nation comes from the Latin nascor, natio, meaning to be born. That's what a nation is. It's a geographical region of people who were born there and who have roots there. That's the important thing. So as a result, no, not everyone can be naturalized into a British or an American citizen, even if they are born in that region, because they don't have roots in that country. And not everyone on the right believes this. There are some, those, for instance, the civic nationalists, like Konstantin Kisin and the people from Trigonometry, maybe Lawrence Fox as well, who believe that values can be transmitted to people and we are mostly plastic, but we have to be really effective at teaching people those values. But anyway, I feel like I ought to clarify where I fall on this. So I would have to say I have more in common with the right than I do with the left. See, my own experience has taught me, I elaborated on this in my videos about antinatalism, incels, and consciousness, that we don't really have as much free will as we think we do. We're all, in a sense, passengers. We're all prisoners of our own bodies. We don't get to decide the laws of nature, how they were written, and the effects that those laws have had on us. This is something that we can choose to ignore at our own peril. Anyway, what connection does this have with my beliefs on nationality and race and stuff like that? Well, we are innately different. There's simply no debate to be had here. We are so different to the point that we ought to take pride in and celebrate the fact that we're different, that we're not like other countries. And at the same time, we should recognize and respect the fact that the world is full of different peoples, and we shouldn't try to artificially change this or homogenize people and make them all the same, which is what I feel for the past few decades the world has been doing. We've been trying to make all these countries adopt liberal democratic values. We've been putting a McDonald's in every city, in every street. Everyone buys the same shopping brands. Every country adopts this or that silly human rights law. See, on the one hand, I'm unapologetically British in the sense that Britain should be a country of... Oh dear, somebody left their car unlocked. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm unapologetically British in the sense that Britain should be a country of people who are of British ancestry, like myself. See, I took an ancestry test a couple of years ago, and basically my entire lineage comprises of Western Europe. Like, my ancestors basically came from literally all over Europe, mostly English, and then there's a decent amount of Irish, then there's Germanic and French, but that's what I am. I'm European, basically. I consider myself English and British. I consider myself British, But more than anything, I'm biologically European. But more importantly, though, I've been able to trace my genealogy, my last name, my last name, and the history of my families, and it all dates back to England. My last name, incidentally, which I'm not going to reveal that for personal data stuff. My last name is an Anglo-Norman name. It's and the Norman invasion has had quite a profound impact on our nation's history and culture. And these are things that I think are fascinating and wonderful. I don't know if you've ever walked past a tree once and thought to yourself, how long has this tree been up here? It's probably been up here for 100 or 200 years. How much cultural change would this tree have seen or observed if it had a pair of eyes? I don't know if anyone's ever thought about things like that, but some things are fascinating purely by virtue of the fact that they've been in place for hundreds of years and they haven't changed. And I'm the kind of person who feels that way. I feel that way very strongly, not just about trees, not about nature, not about buildings as well, but about culture, about history. I don't consider myself a history scholar, but I think we British are a remarkable and fascinating people. We have a right to be proud of who we are and who we have been in the past. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to preserve that and keep it in place. However, for the past few decades, I mean, since the 1940s, and it really took off in the late 90s, there's been a systemic campaign that's been pushed against us of mass immigration. There have been tens of thousands, or more recently, hundreds of thousands, bordering on the millions, of people who do not have the same historical connection to the British Isles that people like me have. They've been settling here in very large numbers, ridiculously large numbers, that makes it simply not practical for them to take time to absorb and understand the cultural norms of this country that they're coming to live in. And each time I look in the news, I'm always reminded of the fact that these people don't have any kind of respect for this country. They're not making any effort to integrate. I don't know if you guys have seen what Whitechapel Station looks like. Whitechapel Station, historically, Whitechapel was the area of London where the Jack the Ripper killings took place. You know, it's a place full of history. But what does it look like now? Well, there's homeless people all over the street. There's people wearing turbans and what are they called? Those little headscarves. And if you've looked at the Whitechapel Station, they included a signpost giving you the name of Whitechapel in, I think, Hindi or Punjabi. This is not in Pakistan. This is not in India. This is not in Bengal. This is in London. Nobody was consulted about this at the ballot box. You think that in the late 90s or the 2000s, Tony Blair said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have infinity billion immigrants from all different parts of the world who have very different ideas about what it means to, of how to treat women and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable and stuff. And we're going to force them to live here. Do you think people would have voted for that? Of course they wouldn't. Because this didn't happen due to a popular mandate. This happened in spite of the fact that there was increasing opposition towards it. And both politicians from both sides of the aisle, Labour and Tories, both of them are guilty of this. No, they all realistically know. they will pander to popular discontent with things like mass immigration. They'll say things like, there's too many immigrants, vote for me and I'll do something about them. But in practice, they do the opposite. Because this is what democracy means nowadays. It means telling people what they want to hear, but not actually doing anything to fix the problem. And the thing about immigration, right, is I don't resent or hate any one person for immutable characteristics that are beyond their control. You know, I think in practice, it's very difficult to hate someone that you've never actually met. Like, I don't go walking down the street and look at a black guy or a Pakistani and think, ooh, he's probably got a bomb somewhere in his rucksack or whatever, or cross the street. Most of the time I don't, because I treat people as individuals, and I always have. That's just the way I am. I find it difficult to psychologically convince myself that anyone who doesn't look like me is an enemy. That's just not how I am. That's not how I've been raised. And I think it's against human nature to act like that. But at the same time, what's happening to us currently, it's an ethnic cleansing by any other name. It's a profound injustice. Like, everyone understands that if you have masses, hundreds of thousands of people all flock to one certain area of the globe in large numbers, to the extent where they have local representation in their own councils, and they start actively lobbying for laws and, you know, customs that suit their interest, despite the fact that there were already people who lived there, that wouldn't be right. I mean, this is what happened. This is what the Han Chinese did to Tibet in, was it the 1980s or 1990s? Everyone understands that that is wrong. That is genocide. When the Chinese flock to Tibet in large numbers and try to make it an administrative region or protectorate of China, and they exile the community leader, the Dalai Lama, that's considered genocide. When the Israelis do the same thing to Palestine and Gaza, because that's what they're doing there, when they try and colonize the area, force Palestinians off the land and make it for Jews only, that is recognized as apartheid. But how do people react when the same thing is basically happening to us in reverse? The fact that we have all these Somalis, all these Indians, Pakistanis, Jamaicans, West Africans, Polish people, whatever, living in every large major city in their own little cultural enclaves, where a great chunk, I don't know exactly the amount, but there's a great chunk of people in London who simply don't speak any English and clearly have no intention to. In practice, how is that any different to what I discussed earlier with the Chinese moving into Tibet? What is happening to us is a profound injustice, and I am rightly angry about it. I don't begrudge these people moving over to the UK necessarily to improve their lot in life, because I guess maybe, hypothetically speaking, if I was born in their situation, I'd want to do the same thing. But that doesn't mean that we should let them. And there are realistic, practical steps that we and our government could take to help them in their own countries, to the extent where they don't need to come over to us and live parasitically off our government largesse and steal our housing supply and just drive down the wages of unskilled workers, because that's what immigration does. Anyway, even if you're pro-immigration in the abstract, even if you believe that immigration is good, and to be honest, to be fair, some immigration is good. There are some immigrants are highly qualified engineers and mechanics and theoretical mathematicians and scientists from all other parts of the world. Now, those people, they add tremendous value to the economy. There is nobody in the far right, I'm going to call them that, the far right is never protesting about those people. Do you understand? Have you ever seen an EDL march against, I don't know, Japanese or American immigrants or French immigrants? Get those Frenchies out. No, it's never happening. Because they are not the ones who are taking over our high streets. They're enriching our economy, and there's so few of them. They aren't making any overall impact or indent into our cultural landscape. But that's not the character of the immigration that we're currently getting and have been getting for the past few decades. Anyway, I've more or less summarized what my views are on immigration and nationality, where I fall more or less on the political spectrum. And I do have a tendency to go off on one and get really angry when I talk about stuff in the news. But I can't apologize for that, because my views are my views. They're based on how I see the world, and they're based on my lived experience and my lived reality. I don't see any point in apologizing to people who have been offended by the things I've said, because I did not make this channel for those people. This channel is and always has been me documenting my personal thoughts. It's therapeutic and it's meaningful for me to get this information out there. And in going back 10 or 12 years ago, when I was much younger than I was now, I was afraid to share this kind of stuff with other people out of fear that they would judge and reject me. And many people feel this way even now. But now that I'm 30 years old, maybe this is a consequence of me getting older, but I find that I've slowly become more detached from what other people think. I realize it is theoretically possible that my employers might find my channel, and I might find that I've no longer got a job. This is an occupational hazard nowadays for expressing your opinions online, for having strong views about the state of the world that will get you into trouble. But honestly, if I had the free will, if I had freedom of choice, I would probably not have these views, or I'd exercise such profound control over my psychology and the way I behave that I wouldn't probably even need to have this channel in the first place. I wouldn't be having the problems in my life I've been having. But as it is, I do not have that. Nobody does. Anyway, I'll end this by saying, my views are my views. I don't plan on changing them for anyone. I may change them at some point if I see some convincing evidence, or somebody who I have immense respect for manages to convince me through persuasion and argument, and I've had some time to reflect on and digest this. But in the meantime, until that happens, if indeed it does, I continue to maintain and believe the mass immigration is a disaster for all Western countries. Not all people are equal. You don't have any right to call yourself a citizen of whatever country just by coming over here. And even if you were born there, because as I mentioned in my earlier video with Axel Rudikabana, I do not believe that guy was English or Welsh. I think it's an anti-truth to call people that. If he was, he would not have committed the crime. And as a society, we just need to come to terms with this. Because nationality, it's not something that you wear like a suit of clothes. And it only works one way. You ever think... Did you know that the English writer George Orwell, Eric Arthur Blair is his real name, he was born in India. This was at the time when India was part of the British Empire. Has anyone ever called him an Indian writer? Of course not. He's as English as me. He is an Englishman down to his heart. And his Englishness was what, inspired his literary themes, because he was concerned with the state of English liberty. It was what motivated him to write against communism. And who else? Who else was that other guy? J.R. Tolkien. He was born in South Africa, but he considered himself English. Well, he basically was. All right, well. Anyway, I hope I've clarified my views on the matter so far. I may well continue to lose even more subscribers, but my views are my views, and they will continue to remain this way for however long, until I am persuaded otherwise by reason and argument. Anyway, you guys take care.